everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Morgan and this little man is Grayson. Today we are going to be talking about my delivery experience and his birth. If you didn't see my previous video, I will have that linked down below. I go through all of my pregnancy symptoms, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the details of my experience as a plus size woman going through her first pregnancy. Today, I did want to kind of break it apart and talk specifically about labor, delivery, and ultimately his birth. If you do hear a little bit of background chatter, my son is over here playing next to me, so if you hear some rattles, some clinging, some clanging, that's probably just him, and I hope you don't mind. My son was born at 39 weeks, 6 days. I was ultimately induced on that date. To back up just a little bit, I did have a high blood pressure scare at 37 weeks, which led me to have a couple of additional appointments where I was being closely monitored for my blood pressure, and ultimately we decided on induction just because of the level of swelling I was having, the amount of monitoring I was going to be continuing to have, and the fact that ultimately my son was ripping my abdominal wall apart and it was becoming very painful for me to walk, even with the belly band. So we did decide on being induced. We ended up getting admitted at 6:15 a.m. and at that point they hooked me up to a whole bunch of monitors so that they could see baby and see me and make sure that neither of us was in any distress and that we were happy and healthy along the entire process. My doctor chose to induce me using Pitocin, so I did get an IV and kind of the lowest dosage and then creeped our way up from there. She said that she wanted to make sure we got enough to induce labor, but not too much, not any more than we needed. We did have external monitors on me and baby, and what that meant for me is that I needed to be in a bed laying down so that they could constantly monitor the baby, and because of his position at the time of my induction, I had to lay kind of half on my side and half on my back, and as a very pregnant woman who hadn't laid on her back for quite some time, and having such a big belly, that was quite painful. So I ended up having a huge backache from the way that I was laying. But from 6 a.m. to about 1 p.m., we maxed out on Pitocin, and I wasn't having any contractions that I could feel. I did have back pain, but if I was able to kind of move and shift more into my side than my back, that pain went away and I felt perfectly fine. Really, I was just kind of tired from not sleeping the night before and ultimately bored. I wanted my son to be there so I could meet him. I was so anxious. But my doctor came in between like 12:30 and 2:30 sometime in the afternoon. Came in and actually broke my water, and at that point they were able to put internal monitors on me as well as baby, and we actually discovered that I was having contractions the entire time and they were quite strong. I just didn't know it, and I don't know if I didn't know I was having contractions just because I had been in pain for so many weeks kind of leading up to this point with the abdominal wall splitting and then with my back pain. I assumed that was from the way I was laying in the bed, but it could have been contractions and just I was feeling them in my back. But I didn't feel kind of the overall tensing of my tummy that they talk about radiating from the top down. I never had that feeling, so it was just, I didn't know I was in labor, basically. But my doctor was like, yeah, you're definitely progressing and you're contracting. So they broke my water and put the internal monitors on me and baby, and that meant I could finally get up out of bed, and it was amazing. I ended up going to the restroom, walking around my room, not realizing that, oh, when you break your water, your body doesn't know that, and it's going to continue to make amniotic fluid. So I was just like leaking all over the place. And once I realized that that was me making puddles on the floor, I decided to kind of stop venturing around the room, and instead I just hung out by the bed, laid down some towels and some like puppy pad things that the hospital had, and just chilled on top of those while I was kind of progressing. The labor pains did end up getting quite significant after my water was broke. Everything went pretty fast from that point forward. So I was maybe about 3-4 centimeters dilated. My doctor broke my water, and then I quickly progressed into about 6 centimeters dilation, maybe in the next hour, maybe 2 hours from there. Ended up deciding that I am in a lot of pain and I want to try some pain meds. They gave me a whole bunch of different options for what I could choose for pain management. I decided to actually try laughing gas. I believe it was called nitric oxide, but don't quote me on that. So they brought in this giant kind of tank of what looked like helium and put a breathing mask on me. I was supposed to inhale all of that goodness and then exhale, kind of taking it off my face. And honestly, it didn't do anything for me. So quickly from there, I just said, you know what, I'm going to get an epidural anyways. That was kind of always my plan. And I don't know how long my labor is going to be because I was induced, and they did warn me that it was my first pregnancy, that because I was going to be induced, it was going to basically take all the laboring I would be doing over several days and compress it into hours, so that it was going to be quite painful and it could take quite some time, just because my body wasn't used to actually delivering a baby since it never had before. Having said all of that, I decided, okay, I'm going to get an epidural. So the anesthesiologist came in. He was actually amazing. I wasn't sure what to expect with the epidural at all, but it went pretty quick, the entire process. Essentially, they had me lean forward on the bed, and he did his thing in the back, kind of telling me, like, hey, do you feel anything? Do you feel anything? And I was like, yeah, I feel it over here. I feel it over here. And he did his thing, and then I was in heaven. Kind of after that came into play, I laid back down, was just resting and hanging out with my family. I had my partner in the room, the father of my son, as well as his mother, my mother, and my younger sister. So it was quite a big room. We were just having a party and relaxing, and I was quite tired because I hadn't slept the day before, but ultimately I feel like I didn't sleep the entire pregnancy, so let's say 9 months before. And I just wanted to relax and kind of just be in a zen, peaceful mode. For me, and when I am in pain, I just like to kind of breathe through it, and I just like quiet and peace. That's like calming to me. So after the epidural, it was just kind of laughing and chit-chatting and waiting. My epidural ended up failing, and that was great. I didn't know that was what was happening, but I was in a lot of pain, and as the baby kind of moved further down into the birth canal, I wasn't having any of that pain masked. So I did call the nurse back in. I was like, I'm pushing my button, I'm trying to get extra juice, and it's just not working. And she called in a different anesthesiologist because we had shifted, or they had a change in shifts by that point. And he came in and gave me a bolus. I believe that's what it was called. And essentially, to my understanding, the original epidural was administered, and it was covering a section of my midsection, essentially, but it didn't spread far enough down to kind of hit and calm those nerves that were lower in my lower uterus and everything that was going to be actually delivering the baby. So to my understanding, the bolus was essentially going to be diluted epidural or diluted medicine that they were using in my epidural, and giving me another dose to kind of spread out the coverage from my epidural because it was a little bit too high. And now that the baby had moved lower into my birth canal, I wasn't getting any of that pain management because those nerves weren't going to get in contact with any of the medicine that was supposed to be numbing me. So I was kind of in a lot of pain, feeling a lot of pressure, and the nurses were asking me if I needed to push or felt like I needed to push, and I was like, I have no idea what that means. I don't know what that feels like. I have no idea. So they checked me. I was 10 centimeters dilated and told me that I had the option to push. Prior to receiving my epidural, they did let me know that for a lot of first-time moms, they'll actually let you just sit there at 10 centimeters so that your body does a lot of the natural laboring for you and kind of pushes baby down so that you don't get exhausted pushing him down in that early stage of labor. But because my epidural had worn off or wasn't working and I was fully dilated, I was free to push. With that being said, I was like, okay, we're going to give it a shot. So I ended up starting to push around about 6:30. And we did a couple of trial pushes, practicing breathing, and actually anchoring down and pushing. One thing I did go through 3 or 4 classes prior to my labor and delivery. One was for breastfeeding, a couple were for baby, and then there was one specifically about labor and delivery, and I didn't remember any of it. I don't know if they talked about how you have to breathe and then hold your breath while you're pushing, but if they did, I didn't remember. Me personally, that was the hardest part, was holding my breath while pushing. And in the movies, I don't remember them ever doing that. And I don't know if it was just my doctor, my hospital, they choosing to do that or if that's normal. But anyways, they had me take a nice deep breath and then hold it, push, and then repeat that 3 times. And I was supposed to hold my breath for at least 10 seconds while pushing down. We did that for about 30 minutes as practice, and then we ended up changing positions and actually doing labor pushes. So I was in active labor, if you want to call it that, for pushing for about 2 hours, and then he was ready to be delivered. The doctor came in, because at this point it was just nurses kind of handling everything up to this point, with the exception of actually breaking my water. That was my physician, but otherwise the nurses were just monitoring me, providing my physician with some updates, and then she came in at the last time where actually his head was crowning, and she was like, okay, I'm gowning up, and it was about 1 or 2 pushes and he was here. It was crazy. So they brought him out and immediately put him on my chest. And it was funny because in all of our pictures, my eyes are just closed, because as soon as he came out, it was just this overwhelming sense of calm, like peace. Almost like you had been missing something and now you were whole, if that makes sense. He just kind of filled something in my life, and I think for his father too. Like, he would explain it in a very similar way, where it's just this overwhelming sense of love, but for me, very completeness. So Grayson James was born at 8:17 p.m. and he was 7 pounds and 13 ounces, 21 inches long. He did start crying as soon as he came out, which was nice and calming. The doctor did have to take his umbilical cord and take it out from around his neck. It came, when he was born, his umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck, and the doctor quickly just took that off, and he was perfectly fine. They laid him on my chest, and it was, magical. Shortly after that, they did some of the measurements of like his heart and his lungs, just listening to him while he was on my chest. And then they did take him just to the other side of the room and do his weights, kind of wipe him down, do his, all of his all of his little baby scans that they do. And everyone in the room got to see him, and then they gave him back to me and laid him back on my chest, and it was absolutely amazing. With that being said, it was so funny because all of the pictures, he is completely like looking around. His eyes are just wide open, so curious, and I'm just like, my eyes are closed. I'm just exhausted. I'm so tired, and I'm just like kind of meditating. So it's just funny because it's like the opposite. I'm not really looking at him, and he's just like staring at me. Hi, Mom. But His umbilical cord was obviously cut, but honestly, I don't remember that at all. His father did do that, and that must have happened after he came out and before they put him on my chest, but it was all so fast that I didn't even recognize it. I did have some tearing, and he ended up scratching me with his nail the entire way on the way out, so that was awesome, but they quickly went ahead and kind of sewn everything up, and you had your afterbirth. I didn't end up pushing anything else out. The doctor said that your body will naturally do that quite often, and if it's necessary, they'll have you push, but typically everything just kind of does its thing and you can just enjoy your baby, and that's what happened. Everyone ended up leaving the room and leaving us, our little family unit, in the room for the next 2.5 hours where we were being monitored, and every 20 to 30 minutes the nurse would come in and actually push on my stomach, pushing out fluids, and that part was quite painful, and I don't know if I would say it was painful as much as it was just uncomfortable, but it was definitely not awesome, but I'm sure it would have been a lot less awesome if they hadn't done that, because you do want to get all of that extra blood and fluid kind of out of your body so that your body can go through a natural healing process. I don't know if it was because of the bolus, but I'm assuming it was. My one leg was very numb. I could move my, I believe it was my right leg the entire time I was in labor and delivery, but my left leg was like completely numb. Like everything went to my left leg. So I was laying in the bed, but they needed to confirm that I was able to go to the restroom by myself before they removed or kept the catheter out. So they removed a catheter. I had to get up and walk to the restroom with the help of 2 nurses. They essentially put a strap around you and then hold you and help you kind of walk through to the restroom. You have to be able to use the restroom by yourself, and then you are free to kind of go into your postpartum room and you have the baby in a bassinet. And for me, they told me to walk like the Tin Man from, The Wizard of Oz, and that was a great way to tell me how I was supposed to walk and lock my knees, because it really did feel and look like I was the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz walking with my knees locked, kind of waddling to the restroom and going. After that, they put me into a wheelchair and we were able to wheel over into the postpartum room where we ended up staying 2 nights. Because my son was born at night, we had to wait so much time between his birth and all of his different prenatals, or all of his different natal screens. So he had to have at least 24 hours before he was able to take his bath, and then needed to take his bath before he was able to do like his heel prick for state exam or blood test, and all of those little steps along the way. So we did end up spending 2 nights in the hospital. The bed was very uncomfortable, and I felt so bad for my boyfriend because he was sleeping on the couch, and he's a pretty large dude. He didn't really fit on that couch. I mean, he's 6'3", and it was tiny. But I know we were both very ready to go home by the time it was time to go home. The hospital air was just very dry, but it was so nice as a first-time parent to be in the hospital and know that your baby is being monitored. So if there's something that goes wrong, there are people there that are trained and can help you. So that's great and so comforting. And my little guy is waking up, so that means it's going to be break time right now. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe. If you have any feedback for me or any questions, leave those below, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you again so much. Have a good day. Bye-bye.